Welcome to the Knowledge Room, your go-to space podcast for smart insights, global trends, and deep dives into migration, work, and opportunity with a Nordic lens. I'm your host, Ryle, and every episode, we explore what's changing, what it means, and how you can stay ahead. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit the plus button or follow wherever you're listening so you never miss an update from the Knowledge Room. Now, let's get started.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're here again to unpack, those complex topics and distill them into the insights you're looking for. Today, we're diving into something really significant. We're going to focus on two main updates. First, this increased flexibility for work permit holders, letting them change jobs much more easily than before. And second, these proposed higher salary thresholds, which, interestingly, come with some very specific profession-based exemptions.
Yeah, those exemptions are key.
And our insights for this deep dive, they come from a really thorough analysis titled Sweden's Evolving Work Permit Rules: Freedom or Filter.
Right. And our goal here, our mission for you listening, is really to provide a shortcut, to pull out the most important nuggets of information, the key insights, so you can really grasp what these changes mean.
So everyone involved, right? Workers, employers.
Exactly. For foreign workers already in Sweden, or maybe thinking about moving there, but also for Swedish employers, and even for the future direction of Sweden's whole labor landscape. It is, like you said, a complex, double-edged reform. We want to give you real clarity on its nuances and potential impacts.
And that title, Freedom or Filter, it really nails the central tension, doesn't it?
It does.
We're going to explore that tension, the potential for more worker autonomy on one side and maybe increased exclusion on the other. It's going to be fascinating. Let's get into it.
Okay, we've set the stage with that big question. Let's unpack the first part, the promise of freedom. And to do that, we really need to start with Sweden adopting the EU Single Permit Directive. That's the May 2026 change, right?
That's the one.
So what's the bigger picture here? What does this directive actually aim to do across Europe? And, how big a deal is this in the grand scheme of things? It's a great place to start because it's crucial to understand this isn't just Sweden acting alone. Adopting the EU's revised Single Permit Directive, it's part of a much bigger coordinated effort across the whole EU. The main goal, the overarching aim within the EU context is pretty clear. Streamline the processes for non-EU citizens who want to live and work in an EU country, and crucially, enhance their ability to move between member states once they're in.
Right, the mobility aspect.
Exactly. For years, you had this patchwork quilt of different national immigration laws, which often created huge barriers, made it incredibly difficult for talented people to move from, say, Germany to Sweden, even if they already had a permit. This directive wants to simplify all that, create something more harmonized, more efficient, and ultimately more attractive for international talent.
So Sweden's move here is partly about boosting its own appeal in that global talent race by aligning with the EU standard, making things more predictable.
Precisely. It's about making Europe, and by extension Sweden, a more logical, less bureaucratic choice for skilled workers. For Sweden specifically, adopting this signals a deeper commitment to being part of that unified European labor market strategy.
Okay.
By harmonizing its rules, it reduces complexity. It signals, hey, we're moving with the European current rather than going off on some completely different path. The strategic goal is fewer hurdles, more clarity, and ultimately strengthening the EU's and Sweden's competitive edge in attracting the skills they need.
That makes total sense. Now let's get into what feels like the real game changer within this directive, especially for individuals. Our source says permit holders won't be tied to a single job or employer anymore. Thinking about someone, let's say, like Maria, a software engineer from Brazil in Stockholm, this must feel like a huge weight lifted, right? After maybe years feeling tied down by her permit conditions.
Oh, absolutely. This is, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say, a truly profound change. It goes right to the core of individual agency, worker rights. Under the old system, Maria's permit, or anyone else's, was usually tied to a specific employer and a specific role.
Right. Very restrictive.
Very. If that job ended, maybe she got laid off, or even if she found a much better opportunity elsewhere, or just wanted to leave a bad work environment, she'd typically have to apply for a whole new permit, often from scratch.
Wow, okay.
In that process, lengthy, uncertain, incredibly stressful, it basically created a situation where workers were, effectively bonded to that first employer. Imagine being in a new country. You've built a life, but your right to stay, your security depends entirely on this one company who might potentially exploit that dependency.
Yeah, that sounds like it creates immense vulnerability, almost like you have no leverage, no bargaining power in your job.
Precisely. It put the worker in a really tough spot. This new rule completely changes that dynamic. The key insight is your permit isn't a leash tying you to your boss anymore. It's more like a key to your own economic freedom.
A key, I like that analogy.
Yeah, it shifts from that bonded system where your freedom of movement, your economic choices were really limited, to one that gives the individual far more autonomy. Think of it like this. Before, Maria's permit was tied to her desk at, say, Tech Innovators, Inc. Now, the permit is tied to Maria. She can take her skills to another eligible employer in Sweden.
And that directly links back to the freedom part of our deep dive title, right?
Absolutely. It empowers people to seek better opportunities, negotiate fairer wages, maybe escape a bad situation without fearing they'll lose their legal status. It's a massive step towards leveling the playing field for migrant workers.
Incredibly impactful, not just for the individuals, but you'd think for the whole labor market, too. And it's not just about the feeling of freedom, there are practical changes, too, right? Especially when changing jobs. The source mentions no more new, long applications, just a simple notification.
Yes, that's another huge practical improvement. The administrative headache under the old system was just enormous. For workers like Maria, sure, but also for the Swedish Migration Agency itself.
I can imagine the paperwork.
Exactly. Every job change basically meant a full reevaluation of the permit. Mountains of documents, often incredibly long waits for decisions, and just constant uncertainty for the person. Reducing that to just a notification, it makes the system vastly more efficient.
How so, specifically?
Well, for workers, they can move between jobs much more smoothly, without that agonizing wait or that very real fear, and it was a real fear for many, that their current permit might expire while the new application was still processing.
Yeah, that limbo state must be awful.
Terrible. And for the migration agency, it frees up resources. Staff who are bogged down in repetitive processing can now focus on more complex cases, or maybe just speed up everything else, which, in turn, helps employers like Artificial Tech Innovators, Inc. fill roles faster if they can hire someone already in the country.
So fundamentally, this should encourage a more dynamic labor market. Talent can move more freely to where it's needed or where the opportunities are better.
Absolutely. It fosters dynamism. If workers can move easily, they can chase promotions, find roles that better match their skills, or just seek out better conditions or pay. This benefits the whole economy, right? Making sure talent gets allocated efficiently.
Yeah, makes sense.
And it also makes Sweden, a more attractive place to build a career long term. Knowing your path isn't going to be blocked by endless bureaucratic hurdles every time you want to make a move. It creates a healthier, more competitive environment.
And stability seems like a big theme here, too.
Yeah.
They're bringing in a 6-month grace period if you lose your job after 2 years, and extending permit validity up to 2 years from just 6 months previously. These sound like really crucial safety nets.
They are absolutely vital changes.
Yeah.
That old 6-month validity period, it meant workers were almost constantly thinking about or actively applying for permit renewals. It added this persistent stress, this constant administrative burden. Extending it up to 2 years dramatically reduces how often you have to go through that.
Gives people breathing room.
Exactly. Much greater long-term stability. It lets people actually plan their lives, their families, their careers with a bit more certainty. You can't overstate the psychological benefit of that feeling more settled, more secure, maybe more willing to invest deeply in your life in Sweden.
And that 6-month grace period, what does that mean in practice for someone who maybe unexpectedly finds themselves out of work?
Oh, that's potentially life-changing. This applies after 2 years of employment, remember. But previously, if you lost your job, your permit status was immediately at risk. You could face deportation, lose your right to stay, if you couldn't find a new qualifying job and get a new permit incredibly fast.
Yeah, intense pressure.
Immense pressure. This grace period gives you a crucial window, 6 months, to actively look for new work without that immediate threat hanging over your head. It's a safety net. It acknowledges that, hey, job loss happens as part of the market reality. It provides a humane, practical buffer.
Prevents desperation, maybe?
Absolutely. It stops people being forced into really desperate situations or maybe being exploited because they have to take the first job offered just to keep their status.
Yeah.
It allows for a responsible job search, not a panicked one. It's about stability and dignity, even when things get tough.
That's a huge relief, I imagine. And speaking of ethics, of protecting workers, there's another rule mentioned. Employers can no longer charge permit fees to employees. That feels like a really significant step against potential exploitation.
It absolutely is. It closes a really critical loophole that was, frankly, quite problematic. This practice of employers charging fees back to the employee for their own work permit. It often bordered on exploitation or directly enabled it.
How so?
Well, in many cases, these fees were a substantial financial burden for the worker. Sometimes an unscrupulous employer might demand a huge fee, or maybe let the worker pay it off over time, effectively tying the worker to them financially, creating a kind of debt bondage situation.
Oh, okay. I see the leverage issue there.
Exactly. By making it explicit, employers cannot charge these fees. Sweden is aiming to level the playing field. It protects workers from these predatory practices, significantly cuts their upfront costs when starting a job, and just helps ensure the whole work permit system operates with more integrity, more transparency.
Deters the bad actors.
Hopefully, yes. It deters those employers who might have used fees to exploit or control their workforce. It sends a clear signal. The cost of doing business, including hiring international talent, is on the employer, not the individual worker who might be in a vulnerable position. It makes the system much more ethical, much more worker-centric.
All these changes definitely point towards a more efficient, more humane system. Our source also mentions the migration agency aiming to cut waiting times from 120 down to 90 days. That's a practical win for everyone, right? Workers, businesses.
It really is. Efficiency in processing applications, it's just fundamental to good governance and a responsive immigration system. Faster processing means companies like our tech innovators can get the talent they need quicker, less costly delays for them.
And less anxiety for the applicant.
Exactly. For workers, it means less time in limbo, less uncertainty, less anxiety about their future. Waiting 120 days, 4 months, sometimes even longer, for a life-changing decision. That's a huge psychological burden. Cutting it to 90 days shows a commitment to better service.
Signals they value predictability.
Yes. It signals that Sweden gets that speed, and predictability matter. If you want to attract and keep international talent, makes the whole process feel less daunting, more attractive. So, while all these things we just talked about, the flexibility, the safety nets, the ethical changes, they clearly offer this newfound freedom.
Right.
It's really crucial. Remember, this is only one side of the coin.
Oh.
Because just like our deep dive title suggests, alongside this freedom, other parts of these reforms are set to introduce a pretty significant filter.
Okay, that brings us perfectly to the other side of this equation, the filter element.
Yep.
The government's plan is to raise the salary requirement for work permits right up to 100% of the median wage in Sweden. That's around 37,100 SEK, roughly $3,500 a month.
Mm-hmm.
That's a substantial number. For many people, that would be a major jump. What does median wage actually mean in this context, and why pick that specific benchmark?
It is indeed a significant jump, and it signals a very clear, very deliberate policy direction. So first, what's the median wage? It's the exact middle point in the range of all wages paid in the country. Half the workers earn more than that, half earn less.
Okay, the midpoint.
Exactly. So when a government sets a work permit salary requirement at 100% of that median, they are explicitly saying, we want to attract workers who fall into the higher earning half of our national economy. It aligns with what's often called a human capital approach to immigration, focusing on the immediate, measurable economic contribution.
And the intention behind that high bar?
Well, it seems multifaceted. Firstly, attract highly skilled workers. People who command higher salaries are generally assumed to contribute more through taxes, bring specialized expertise, and so on. Secondly, it's framed as preventing competition for lower-wage jobs, supposedly protecting domestic workers in those sectors.
Right, the argument that it ensures foreign workers aren't undercutting local wages?
That's the argument, yes. That by setting such a high bar, they ensure foreign workers are filling high-value, high-demand roles that are harder to fill locally. But for many, especially those maybe working in service industries or entry-level professional roles, that 37,100 SEK figure is a huge increase over previous requirements. It becomes a major barrier.
And this leads directly into what we're calling the filter effect, the risk of excluding entire low-wage sectors from hiring internationally. Which sectors are we really talking about here? Who's most vulnerable, and what could the consequences be?
This is exactly where that filter becomes really visible and potentially quite controversial. The sectors usually characterized by lower wages are pretty broad. Cleaning services, definitely.
Yeah.
Large parts of hospitality, think hotel staff, kitchen assistants, general restaurant workers, some retail positions, some agricultural jobs too.
Essential services, often.
Absolutely. Often the backbone services of daily life, of the economy. but the nature of the work just doesn't command salaries near the national median. This policy could severely impact their ability to hire internationally, which they often rely heavily upon because they struggle to find enough local workers for these roles.
And the consequences if they can't hire.
They could be significant. You could see real labor shortages in these essential but lower-paid jobs. That could lead to disruptions. Maybe restaurants have to reduce hours. Hotels can't clean rooms fast enough. Public spaces aren't maintained. It could increase costs for consumers. It might even impact the quality of services. It also kind of ignores the broader social and indirect economic contributions that all workers make, regardless of their paycheck size.
So it really forces this debate, doesn't it? Is this a necessary evil to ensure only high-value migration focusing on immediate economic return? Or is it creating an economic wall that ignores genuine essential labor needs and can actually hurt the economy in other ways?
That is the absolute core tension. It's a debate happening in many countries. Proponents will argue, yes, raise the bar, ensure immigrants are net contributors, don't depress wages. They might even argue it forces employers to offer better wages overall to attract anyone.
Okay.
But the critics will immediately counter. It's an economic barrier that fails to see that all jobs, even lower-paid ones, are necessary for society to function. It risks creating this kind of two-tier labor market. Highly paid professionals welcome, other vital sectors facing chronic shortages. It's a stark contrast to the freedom aspect we discussed earlier. This is the economic filter in action. It's a strategic choice, yes, but one with undeniable trade-offs.
It does feel like a very blunt tool for what seems like a complex problem. However, they do acknowledge essential roles, right? There's this proposed list of 152 exempted professions. Our source mentioned engineers, nurses, but also cleaners and cooks.
Yes, and the diversity of that exemption list is really fascinating. It includes professions like cleaners and cooks alongside engineers and nurses. And that really highlights the complexity here, the government trying to wrestle with labor market realities.
So why exempt such different roles? What's the thinking?
The rationale behind exemptions like these is almost always driven by one thing: critical labor shortages that they just cannot fill domestically. Engineers, nurses globally in demand, clear skill gaps. Including them makes sense, even if some specific roles might technically fall below the median. They're seen as indispensable.
Okay, that's logical. But cleaners and cooks.
That's what gets really telling. These are typically lower-wage jobs. Without international workers, these sectors often face severe recruitment problems locally. Including them on the exemption list suggests that while the government wants to raise the overall salary bar, it recognizes some essential sectors simply cannot function without access to international labor, regardless of the median wage benchmark.
So it's like an admission that a rigid salary threshold alone wouldn't work, a pragmatic concession.
Exactly. It's an implicit admission that a pure, inflexible salary rule would create unmanageable shortages in vital areas. So they're forced to make pragmatic concessions to economic reality, even if it looks a bit contradictory.
It does seem contradictory, raising the bar but then making exceptions for the very sectors that would be hit hardest. Why take this seemingly paradoxical approach, especially when, as our source notes, the authorities specifically mention exploitation risks in sectors like cleaning and food service?
Yeah, that paradox you've hit on brings us to a really key underlying motivation the authorities talk about. That stated concern about the risk of exploitation in some sectors, specifically naming cleaning and food service. They also mention wider worries about abuse, human trafficking, and fake employment contracts.
Ah, okay.
And this is where the salary threshold and the exemption list kind of intersects with the government's goal of combating these serious issues. The thinking, or at least the stated rationale, might be that a higher general salary requirement could deter fraudulent actors who target vulnerable workers.
How would that work?
The idea might be that if you have to pay a median wage, it makes exploitative business models less profitable. Maybe it discourages fake employment setups designed just for trafficking or residency scams. It could, in theory, make it harder to exploit workers in plain sight if there's a higher mandated wage providing some baseline protection.
So the theory is higher required salary equals more legitimate employers, fewer opportunities for traffickers.
That seems to be part of the logic, yes. If an employer has to commit to paying a median wage, maybe the financial incentive for scams decreases, and it attracts only employers genuinely needing talent for proper jobs. But that paradox you mentioned is still right there.
Because they exempt the risky sectors anyway.
Exactly. By then exempting the very sectors noted for exploitation risks, cleaning, food service heretics, it really begs the question, is a salary floor the best tool to fight complex problems like human trafficking or fake contracts? Or is it just too blunt?
What would be better tools?
Well, combating trafficking and abuse effectively usually requires much more. Robust enforcement of labor laws, strong worker protections, transparent recruitment channels, clear legal pathways, support for victims, not just a salary number. It suggests that while the intention might be good, the policy design could leave legitimate, low-wage but essential sectors struggling, while the core problems of exploitation might just adapt or require different, more targeted solutions altogether.
It's clearly a really difficult tightrope they're trying to walk. We do have some quotes from officials that maybe shed a bit more light on their thinking. Migration Minister Johan Forsell said, "We need facts. We don't want to repeat past abuses." And Hannah Gertsen from the Migration Board added, "It's about more than money. It's about rights, safety, and trust." What do these statements tell us about the government's perspective here?
These statements are really crucial, I think, for understanding the drivers and maybe the competing ideas behind these reforms. Forsell's quote, "We need facts. We don't want to repeat past abuses." The highlights, first, a desire for evidence-based policy, which is always good to hear.
Right.
But more significantly, it points to a historical context. It strongly suggests there have been perceived, or maybe actual, abuses within the previous system that the government is determined to prevent happening again.
What kind of abuses?
It could be instances of worker exploitation that weren't caught, maybe fraudulent applications that got through, or perhaps just a feeling that the old system wasn't effectively serving Sweden's labor needs or protecting workers adequately. This reflects maybe a more cautious or conservative stance prioritizing control, preventing negative outcomes based on past experiences, learning from mistakes, tightening the system based on what they see as facts about past failures, aiming for more control, more security in the process.
Okay, a focus on control and avoiding past mistakes. And then Gertsen's statement, "It's about more than money, it's about rights, safety, and trust," seems to broaden that perspective, doesn't it? More holistic.
Precisely. Gertsen's quote is vital because it explicitly brings in the human rights dimension, the systemic integrity angle. While that salary threshold feels very economic, she frames it, and potentially the whole package of reforms, within this bigger context of rights, safety, and trust.
What does that imply?
It implies the government believes or wants to project that a higher salary and the policies around it are part of ensuring people coming to Sweden aren't vulnerable, that they have a baseline of financial security which contributes to safety, and that the system itself operates with integrity, building trust among everyone involved, migrants, employers, the public.
So higher pay equals less vulnerability, more trust in the system.
That seems to be the underlying idea. If workers are paid decently, they're perhaps less likely to be exploited, and it fosters a more transparent, trustworthy environment. So you have Forsell focusing on preventing past abuses, maybe from a more practical, control-oriented view, while Gertsen emphasizes the ethical side, the systemic benefits, the aspiration for a fairer, more dignified system.
Two sides of the same coin, perhaps.
Perhaps. Together, they show a government grappling with multiple goals. Economic benefit, yes, but also preventing exploitation, upholding rights, and trying to build a system that feels fair and trustworthy. The critical question for us and for you listening is really to think about how well these stated motivations actually align with the proposed policies. Do the solutions truly address the underlying problems effectively, or could there be unintended consequences?
That takes us nicely into our final part, looking beyond borders, Sweden's place in the global talent landscape. Because these reforms aren't just happening in a Swedish bubble, are they? They're part of much broader trends.
Not at all. They're absolutely connected to wider European and global forces.
So what are the main drivers pushing migration reform across the EU right now? And how does Sweden's specific approach kind of fit into that bigger picture?
Yeah, these Swedish reforms are really a microcosm of larger, undeniable trends shaping policies everywhere, especially in the EU. You can point to three key interconnected drivers. First, and maybe biggest, aging populations.
Right. The demographic challenge.
Huge challenge. Many EU countries, Sweden included, have declining birth rates and increasing share of older citizens. This puts massive pressure on social welfare, healthcare, pensions, and just the size of the active workforce needed to keep the economy going.
So migration becomes almost a demographic necessity, not just an economic bonus.
In many respects, yes, it becomes structurally important. Second driver, widespread skill shortages. Across so many industries, tech, healthcare, absolutely, but also manufacturing, construction, essential services.
Yeah.
They just can't find enough qualified people locally.
Not just high-tech jobs, then.
No, definitely not. It's across various skill levels. So countries are desperately competing for talent to fill these gaps just to stay economically competitive. And third, linked to that, is intense global talent competition.
Everyone wants the best and brightest. Exactly. Countries like Canada, Australia, the US, plus emerging economies. They're all actively recruiting global talent. If your immigration system is slow, complicated, or puts up too many barriers, you simply risk losing out on the people you critically need to innovate and grow. These pressures force countries to constantly rethink their strategies.
So looking at Sweden's approach to high salary threshold, but with those specific exemptions, is it primarily trying to cherry-pick the highest earners? Or is it trying to solve those deeper demographic and skill gaps? How does it compare to what other EU countries are doing?
It feels like a complex mix of both, to be honest. That very high salary threshold, it definitely points towards cherry picking, targeting highly skilled, high earning individuals expect to be immediate net economic contributors. That aligns with the global trend towards points-based systems favoring skills and earnings.
But the underlying demographic pressures mean they still need significant numbers of people across various sectors, not just the elite. And the exemption list acknowledges that. Other EU countries, you see a whole spectrum. Germany, for example, recently made big moves to simplify immigration for skilled workers across more sectors, recognizing broader labor needs. Others might be more restrictive.
So Sweden's approach is kind of unique.
It feels like a unique attempt to balance these forces. The high threshold aims for the top tier, while the exemption list pragmatically admits they need workers in essential, even if lower paid, sectors too. It's their specific strategic move to navigate that tricky global talent landscape, trying to find their own balance point.
Which brings us right back to that core tension highlighted in our source. Sweden could become a leader in fair migration, or it could risk becoming a filter that screens out the vulnerable. It really does feel like a crossroads moment for Sweden. What do those two paths actually imply for Sweden's image, its identity on the world stage?
This is really the ultimate question these reforms raise, isn't it? And it resonates way beyond Sweden. Being a leader in fair migration? Well, that implies policies that manage to be both humane and economically beneficial.
The ideal scenario.
Right. A system that genuinely protects worker rights, ensures dignity, treats people fairly, and contributes positively to society, while also attracting the talent needed for growth. It suggests that delicate balance where opportunity is open and vulnerabilities are genuinely minimized. The flexibility changes, the grace period, ending employer fees, those definitely lean towards this leadership ideal, this humane policy approach. It could position Sweden as a real beacon.
But that filter aspect,
Yeah.
that raises a very different, quite worrying possibility.
Exactly. Becoming a filter that screens out the vulnerable. That implies policies where the primary focus shifts heavily towards short-term economic gain, possibly at the cost of social equity, or even ignoring practical labor needs in essential areas. If that high salary threshold, even with exemptions, makes it impossible for genuinely needed workers in lower-paid roles to come or stay.
Then Sweden becomes more exclusive.
Potentially, yes. An exclusive club may be only accessible to a privileged few defined by their paycheck. It might solve some immediate economic calculations, but could worsen others, like those chronic labor shortages in vital services. And it raises really profound questions about social justice, who gets deemed valuable enough to contribute.
What does fair migration even mean in that context?
That's the key question. Fair for whom? Fair for the state in terms of tax revenue. Fair for the individual seeking opportunity. Fair for the overall social fabric that relies on all kinds of work. How these rules actually play out will profoundly shape Sweden's identity, either as that beacon of progressive, pragmatic migration policy, or as a nation that maybe unintentionally created new walls for people who could offer essential contributions.
It's clearly a huge shift with real impacts on people, industries, the country itself. So looking ahead, what should we and our listeners be watching for as these reforms roll out over the next couple of years? What are the key uncertainties?
Policy is always a moving target, isn't it? Implementation always throws up surprises. There are three critical things to keep a close eye on, I think. First, the final law approval timeline, and any last-minute tweaks. May 2026 is the target, but legislative processes can be unpredictable. Amendments can pop up.
Okay, the final text matters.
Absolutely. Second, and this is crucial, the confirmed exemption list. That list of 152 professions is still proposed. What makes the final cut? Are there additions, subtractions? That will really determine the true reach of the filter and which sectors keep access to workers below the median wage. That list is basically the government's main tool to adjust to labor market needs, so watching how it evolves is key.
And the third thing, the real-world impact.
Exactly. This is the bottom line. How do these reforms actually affect foreign workers on the ground? Does the increased flexibility genuinely empower them, lead to better jobs, better conditions? Does the higher salary threshold really attract top talent without causing damaging gaps elsewhere? And do the anti-exploitation measures actually work, or do new vulnerabilities pop up?
The live experience.
Precisely. The real-world effects on people's lives, their careers, their ability to integrate, and how it ripples through the broader economy. That's the ultimate test of whether this policy succeeds or fails. It's vital to remember policy is dynamic. We need to monitor the actual impact. The lessons learned won't just be for Sweden. They'll be relevant for many other nations facing similar dilemmas.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we are definitely left with that central tension we started with. Freedom or filter? On one side, you have Sweden making these really historic moves towards freeing foreign workers, getting rid of those restrictive employer ties, offering grace periods, longer permits, stopping exploitative fees.
Real steps towards autonomy.
That promise of freedom to change jobs feels fundamental, like not just a luxury. It empowers people, and you'd think it makes for a more dynamic market.
But then there's the other side, those proposed high salary thresholds. Even with that important exemption list, they clearly act as an economic filter. And it raises that uncomfortable question. Should access to that newfound freedom, the basic chance to work and build a life in Sweden, depend so heavily on your payslip, especially when essential services often depend on labor that just doesn't meet that high threshold? It's such a complex balance, with clear potential upsides and undeniable potential downsides.
Indeed. Sweden really does have this profound opportunity, doesn't it? To find that balance between opportunity and protection. To attract the talent it needs, yes, but also safeguard the rights and dignity of all workers contributing to its society.
It's a huge challenge.
The big question remains, will it succeed in this incredibly delicate dance? And maybe for you listening, what does an ideal balance even look like in this kind of policy? And what wider lessons can we draw from watching Sweden navigate this? Lessons that might apply elsewhere as more countries face these same pressures in our interconnected world. Those are definitely the questions to keep pondering as you continue your own deep dive into these complex global issues.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Knowledge Room. If you found this episode helpful, do us a small favor. Share it with a friend who might need a little push to get started. And please don't forget to hit that follow button on your podcast app. It means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more value-packed content week after week. We're here to support you, inspire you, and walk with you as you grow. Until next time, keep learning, keep moving, and never stop starting. See you in the next episode.